What is going on, everybody? We got Jordan Elliott back in the house today. I titled this episode, Jordan, 49ers Vibe Check, because it's Friday. We're headed into another game, a big Monday Night Football game against the Rams. Let's just start off. What's the vibe right now, Jordan? What's your vibe? And then we'll drill down. We'll talk about we'll put a bow on the Cardinals game. We'll look forward to the Rams game. But what's the vibe right now on the Friday for you today?
I mean, the sun's out in the Bay Area. Like, it's a nice day here. Like, as much as, things aren't great in 49ers land, like, I'm not going to let them, like, ruin my week or my weekend. So my vibe is fine. I'm going to, do the show with you, do some grocery shopping, go out get some dinner tonight. Like, I'm fine, but the 49ers aren't fine. And I think that they last week we talked about how they had a chance to make like a big statement against the Cardinals, and they had a statement or, a chance to make a statement saying, we're back, we're still a good team. And they literally did whatever like the polar opposite of that was. They decided to go that route instead. So here we are. They're 3-5. They're playing a Rams team that's already very good. And now they're getting even better with Odell Beckham and Von Miller likely making their debuts. So, I mean, I'm a pretty optimistic guy, but I also like to think that I'm pretty realistic too. So I'm not super hopeful about Monday night's game. I'll be completely honest, and I think that's not a surprise to anybody hearing it.
Absolutely, and I think you actually probably have the same vibe a lot of fans have right now, just based on everything that's going on. But let's go back really quickly because I do want to get your thoughts on the game against the Cardinals. We knew what the stage was. No Kyler Murray, no DeAndre Hopkins, no AJ Green, no JJ Watt. Chase Edmonds goes down in the first series. What was your takeaway? Again, keeping on the same, we'll drill down, but just keeping on the same, sentiment of vibe. Like, what was just the vibe of that game, and how everything went about, considering all the limitations that Arizona had going into it, and how the team performed at home on top of it.
I mean, it was flat out embarrassing. Like, there's no real other way to like put it. I struggled to think back of a loss that was like more embarrassing given the context, the importance. Like, Niners have had some bad losses over the years. Don't get me wrong. They've gone through stretches where they weren't a very good team. But how many times have they had a loss like that bad where they were, a favorite at home playing a team that's banged up, that's missing its best playmakers on offense, its quarterback, in a game they kind of had to win? I struggled to think of one that was bad, as bad. And, I know people thought the Colts game was bad. Maybe the Seattle game was really bad. But this game, just the importance of it and the amount that they like needed to have it. And the biggest thing that got me was that if you hear John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan talk after the game and this week, they were there. It wasn't, I know we hear the like, oh, we need to execute, we need to do this and that, but they kept coming back to, well, we had a great week of practice. Like, I was shocked at how we played. We played great in practice. Like, John Lynch was on KMBR yesterday saying practice was great. They were fired up all week. It just didn't translate. And that to me is the most concerning part, because they're going into these games clearly thinking that they were going to right the ship and that they have this figured out and that the practice was great. And then it's not translating at all. So I just think that they're lost. Like, if you go back and you watch that game, like, yeah, there's a few plays that really could tip it. I thought that whatever penalty, the hands inside the face mask penalty or whatever they called on Armstead was just beyond stupid. And it's one of a number of penalties that defensive players are getting racked up against this year, that it's making playing defense in the sport of football nearly impossible, in my opinion. But it's not the reason they lost the game. This is the biggest difference with this 49ers team, is that when they were good a couple of years ago, they could overcome adversity and overcome turnovers and overcome questionable penalties or whatever you want to say. This year, they need everything to go right. That Chicago game where it seemed like they righted the ship, they didn't have any backbreaking penalties and they didn't turn the ball over. Obviously, in the Arizona game, they had some backbreaking penalties and they turned the ball over multiple times. So I just think they're at the point now where it's like, you can't really, even though they're very talented still, like, there are objectively talented players on the team, they haven't proven that they can be competent enough to overcome the slightest bit of adversity. And that's the most concerning part, because that's what quality contending teams do. They're able to take adversity on the chin and, fight through it. And, it may not be pretty, but you find a way to get a win. This team's not only not playing pretty, they're getting blown out by teams starting journeyman quarterbacks. And like, that's what's really concerning to me.
It is really concerning too, because if you just go back and you look at the history under Kyle Shanahan regime, you go back to 2017, a team that was led by Brian Hoyer, the Hoy God, who's going to lead us to the promised lands. They still, we know that team and how it was constructed and how it was built at that point. It was essentially like an XFL team. There's so many young pieces, older veterans that just there was not a lot of superstar power on that 2017 roster. However, that team before Jimmy Garoppolo showed up still managed to lose 5 games by 3 points or less. They were in it. They were fighting. We talked about vibe earlier. The vibe of this team doesn't even match what they were in 2017. At least in 2017, we knew they were deficient in talent. We knew they didn't have the right pieces to really go very far. But what you could hang your hat on was how hard they would fight, how hard they would never give up in games. There was just this unrelenting grit. It transferred from 2017 to 2018 after they lost Jimmy Garoppolo to ACL injury. The same situation. We knew the talent wasn't there, but they still kept fighting. We're not getting that same vibe with a roster that has talent and has talent to actually beat these teams that show up in front of them. So again, the title of the show was Vibe Check, and I'm just not getting the vibe from this team that they're all in, and I just not like they might be, but there's just something that is stopping them from moving forward. And do you kind of get that same sense?
Yeah, I just don't think that there is this like hunger that's been there in the past. And I think it was really concerning yesterday. I'm sure enough people have seen it. And if they hadn't, John Lynch was on Tolbert, Kruger, and Brooks on KMBR. And Tom Tolbert asked him, like, hey, do you think there's guys in the building that will look other teammates in the eye and say, like, hey, this can't happen anymore. We need to fix this. And, kind of being a vocal leader. And his response was, yeah, but I don't think that that's happened this year. And I think that's very telling. First of all, I don't agree with the decision to come out and just say that. I appreciate the honesty, but at the same time, I don't know what you gain from that. Secondly, I think that it is something that needs to be pointed out. I said yesterday, I really overlooked kind of the human element with some of these replacements. Like, I love Joe Staley. Joe Staley is one of my favorite 49ers of all time. But objectively, I think Trent Williams has been the best left tackle and the best offensive lineman in the league since he came to San Francisco last year. So in my mind, I'm sitting here and I'm like, hey, as much as it sucks to lose Joe Staley, you upgraded the player, like you upgraded the position, on the field, the on-field product. But at the same time, you also lose Joe Staley, the leader in the locker room, the guy who commands respect, the guy that kind of is that voice, the guy that's probably there. I obviously wasn't there personally, but I imagine with that personality that Joe Staley has, it's the kind of energy you want to be around after a tough loss and the kind of person you want to lift you up when you are down. And I just think that the 49ers lost so many guys like that, again, I admittedly got so caught up in the production on the field and the player rather than the person. And when you lose a DeForest Buckner, when you lose a Richard Sherman, when you lose a Joe Staley, it's really hard. And it's, these things organically sort themselves out over time. Guys will eventually step in and take on those leadership roles. When you have guys like that were just seasoned veterans that not only had respect in their locker room, but had respect around the NFL, those are big shoes to fill. So I don't necessarily fault players on the team for not doing it this year because I don't think it's something that you can just force. But I do also think it's concerning that it appeared that there seemed to be a leadership void. And then the general manager is on the radio basically saying, like, yeah, we have guys who are capable of doing it. They're just not doing it. So I think that's very telling. And I wish I could offer a solution to how you fix that, but I really don't know what you do at that point in regards to fixing that kind of leadership that's been lacking.
100%. And you can even compound that even further. The same vibe, the same concept of, okay, you lose some key leaders, you lose some key voices in that locker room. Okay, well, who do you have left? Oh, you still got George Kittle. Oh, you still got Jimmy Garoppolo. And boom, therein lies the problem is that the leaders that you do have, and that are still there, and the vocal ones who lead by example and lead up front and do it all, the Fred Warners, all of that, they have all hitched their wagon to Jimmy Garoppolo, who will not be on this team likely next year. And that kind of feels like that's how they're playing. It feels like this group knows they're on borrowed time. They've lost those core leaders that had been there before, had withstood multiple regimes, withstood the test of time. But unfortunately, they're not there anymore. And then the leaders that you do have rallied around Jimmy Garoppolo, who is a guy who will not be here next year, or at least in my opinion, shouldn't. Regardless of how well he plays, again, you spend all that draft capital on Trey Lance to go get him, and it clearly has not worked to the way they thought it would work. If this team was winning, this is a non-issue. If they're out there winning games, they have a winning record with Jimmy Garoppolo slinging it, doing what he does. We're not talking about this. But the problem is, it's those guys, those core guys are here. They're in that locker room and they are not winning, and the effort and the vibe just isn't there. So it's really hard because we are both generally optimistic people when it comes to looking at football, looking at all the different variables, because there are so many to take into account that actually translate into what is going on here. But I think the problem is that we're doing that, and we keep coming up with the same type of answer, the same type of scenario. It's just something's off. And I think you hit it with the leadership aspect. Obviously, there's going to be more things that come out of that locker room once this year's said and done. We don't need to go into that right now, but there's something going on within that locker room, and I think we saw it against the Cardinals, right? Because when you translate into the Cardinals, well, Jimmy Garoppolo played okay. I think we would both agree that actually Jimmy Garoppolo played all right, but everyone else seemingly just can't get out of their own way. What do you think the 49ers did against the Arizona Cardinals that you just can't do, and think, how do they, is there a path to correct how they performed against the Cardinals, and is there a way to get away from that as they move towards the
So
Rams?
I think the thing with Jimmy Garoppolo that's really interesting is, yeah, I don't think they lost the game because of him. I thought that he's played a lot more aggressive the last couple weeks than I feel like he has in a long time. I think the interesting thing with him though is that even when he is playing like well and you're not losing games because of him, it kind of tells the story of why I think they traded up for Lance, because even on his like better days, the offense put up 17 points, and I understand there were fumbles and there were things that weren't due to him. But there are also, if you go back, not everybody has the privilege of watching, coaches film or has the time to go through all that. But after going back and watching it, he left a lot of reads on the field. He left a lot of throws on the field. And it's stuff that's not just a one-off thing. It's been happening for years. It's just kind of who he is as a quarterback. So even when it
Mhm.
appears that he's playing very well, not only is the offense still kind of capped in a way, but he also is, I don't want to say holding them back, because again, I don't think it's fair to place blame on him when there were so many other things that went wrong that were far more
Right.
of the cause of why they lost than Garoppolo. But I just think it's kind of telling. Like, the dude plays pretty poorly, to be honest, for a good portion to start the season. I thought he had moments here and there, but for the most part, I didn't think he played that well. And the team around him is holding up. The defense is holding up on these short fields. And then the running game starts to get going. Jimmy starts to, play well. And then the defense starts to take this huge step back. So they haven't been on the same page all season. The thing I would add, though, is that there's plenty of teams around the league that deal with the same adversity the 49ers are dealing with. Like, if you look at Tampa Bay's secondary is way worse than the 49ers is now. They've been riddled with injuries. They had to bring in Richard Sherman off the street a couple days before a game earlier in the season. Like,
And he's
they
coaching
have,
now. He's not
yeah,
even playing.
yeah, exactly. So they've had, their share of injuries too, where they're having to sign guys and bring guys in. Like, I know people make the excuse, well, the Niners had to bring in, Kirkpatrick and Norman and these guys. The difference is the Buccaneers have an offense and a quarterback that's capable of keeping them in games, even with that, struggle on the back end. And again, I'm not expecting Jimmy Garoppolo to be Tom Brady. That's unrealistic and unfair. But at the same time, it's year 8. It's pretty evident that he's never going to be a guy that's going to consistently elevate his team when facing adversity like this. And I just don't think you can consistently win in the NFL without a quarterback like that, which is why you see teams like the Rams. The Rams have been a really good team for the last 4 or 5 years. And they looked at Jared Goff and they were like, hey, we're winning in spite of him, not because of him. And then they move a king's ransom to bring in Matthew Stafford. And we're clearly seeing, while they're still having a, they were successful before, now we're seeing them take that offense and take that, ceiling and push it even higher. So I just think with Jimmy, like, he is what he is. And I've been saying for like a year now, like, it's unfair to expect him to get any better. And if the 49ers continue to keep putting him out there and expect different results, that's on him and not them. All right, it's on them and not him. I had that backwards. Sorry.
and the chat is responding, Jordan. You're spitting that fire. And you can even take this back to training camp when both you and I were there. We saw the same Jimmy Garoppolo in training camp every single day. It, like, the whole notion, again, we understand what was going on this offseason. There was an agenda, even though there wasn't, according to Kyle Shanahan. But the way that they talked about Jimmy Garoppolo and propped him up, again, he is playing just like he played in training camp. So if that was his best version of himself in training camp that we've ever seen, then that tells us why you drafted Trey Lance. That tells us why you spent so many draft picks rather than just sitting at 12 and seeing how the chips fall. Instead, you make a move that could potentially hinder the future of your franchise. It feels at this point they've effectively kind of nerfed the locker room in the sense, and they all understand they're on borrowed time. So it is what it is. So basically what it feels like at this point is working around all these issues. But something that we were talking about offline a little bit, and I want to get you to expand on a little bit, is when we look at the defense and we look at the struggles, obviously in training camp, like we just talked about with Jimmy, on the other side of the football, we were really looking at that defensive line to really just take that step forward, take over for the entire unit, and that be the core unit that essentially sets the tone for the entire team. What is your sense of what's going on with the defensive line, and what are your thoughts on that?
So the 49ers, first of all, I would say the 49ers, since John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have taken over, have made it very clear that their philosophy is they want to load up the defensive line. They want to pressure opposing quarterbacks. They always cite, like, the Buccaneers teams John Lynch played on. Kyle Shanahan always talks about the Ravens in the early 2000s. He mentioned, like, the Colts with Robert Mathis and Dwight Freeney and all these things. The problem that I have with that is that while we did see, I will admit, we did see the success in 2019 when the defensive line was there, but we also saw how they were only able to keep that group together for one season, and they weren't able to retain a DeForest Buckner. Dee Ford wasn't able to stay healthy. They really are banking on a model that I think is archaic. I wrote something about it, just something quick last night that was on Niners Nation this morning, about how I just think the way the NFL is evolving, the way we're seeing, holding is being called less than it ever has. They're letting guys blatantly get away with holding. There's the old sentiment, there's holding on every play, but it's been bad this year. Like, I'll admit, not just 49ers games. If you watch around the league, they're letting guys get away with holding at a rate that I don't think they ever have. Quarterbacks.
Trent Williams, one of his key moves to getting people on the ground is technically holding. So
yeah, and that's
food for thought.
Yeah, and it's happening regularly. And then on top of it too, like, you see these roughing the passer penalties where a guy barely lays a finger on the opposing quarterback and you're getting lit up for 15 yards and an automatic first down. So you can't really even cite the, like, oh, we're just going to keep pummeling the quarterback over the course of a game and it's going to make him scared and timid in the pocket, because you lay a finger on them and they're going to end up, again, getting these unnecessary roughness penalties. So my whole point of this is that the league has clearly evolved since the early 2000s when the Ravens and the Buccaneers and these teams were dominating with these ferocious pass rushes, to a point now where they're so heavily tilted towards favoring offenses and the quarterback that I think that it's, well, I don't agree with it. It's favored the offense so much that I think the effectiveness of having a top flight D line isn't the same as it once was. And when you're pulling so much of your resources into loading up a D line, and teams are either getting bailed out by cheap penalties, they're able to hold, or like we've seen against Arizona and Green Bay, they just got the ball out quick and they threw the ball into space, and the D line essentially was taken out of the game plan because they never even had time to get home.
They're
So
blocking Bosa with wide receivers out here. They're getting them on the ground with Alan Lazard. Like, come on now.
yeah, and so that's my biggest thing is that while I won't argue that obviously it would be great to have a pass rush that's disrupting quarterbacks. That's not my argument. My argument is that the 49ers thinking has been we're just going to pool so many resources into the defensive line that we're going to have such a good pass rush that we don't need top flight corners. We don't need a top flight secondary. We have our good safeties and Jimmy Ward and Jaworski Tart. And, I think Jason Verrett getting hurt changed things a little bit. But even the past couple of seasons, they knew that they didn't have a great secondary. And they've pretty much openly acknowledged, like, hey, we're willing to, sacrifice a little bit on the back end if it means having a stronger pass rush up front. And what we're seeing this year is that group just isn't delivering. The 49ers, for all the resources they put into that defensive line, which I think you and I both, after watching them in training camp, expected to be a really good unit. They're 25th in the league in pressures and they're 30th in QB hits. So it's like you're diverting resources away from the secondary. They're not really addressing the skill position groups. We're seeing guys like Trent Sherfield and Mohamed Sanu, with no disrespect to them, getting reps that you could be giving to a guy, maybe a free agent you bring in to be a wide receiver 3, or maybe a draft pick on day 2. Because again, it keeps coming back to them putting so much attention on that defensive line. And I just think that, again, we're at a point now where you're so much better off building your team around a dynamic quarterback, around an offense that can score points, and then around a secondary that can cover. I know there's this back and forth where does pass rush create a good secondary? Does secondary create a good pass rush? And I just think that there's enough evidence that having a good shutdown secondary, you can scheme pressure. It's really hard to scheme guys in coverage. So I just think that level of just D-line before everything else has gone the way of the past, and it's not going to be effective. And I will add real quick to end my rant, I do think that the 49ers, even if they're, reluctant to do so, will be forced to change that. And Trey Lance being selected where he was with the amount of capital they invested is the reason why, because they're going to have to set him up for success. They're going to have to start building an offense around him. They're going to have to make that offensive line get a little bit younger. They're going to have to add skill position guys beyond just Debo, Aiyuk, and Kittle. So I think it will work itself out organically, but I just think that they have put so much emphasis into just defensive lines disrupt everything. And maybe that was the case 20 years ago when the majority of quarterbacks in the league were pockets guys that couldn't get away. But even watching against the Cardinals, Colt McCoy is in his mid-30s, and he's a journeyman backup quarterback, and he's evading the pass rush and rushing for 5 or 6 and evading these sacks. So I just think the combination of the evolution of the league, the influx of the young dynamic quarterbacks that are able to buy time with their legs and escape pressure, you're just minimizing the effectiveness of the defensive line. And while it's still good to have a good pass rush, you're going to keep Armstead locked up. You're going to keep Bosa locked up. Focusing that as the end-all, be-all of your team and having your success ride on whether or not they produce is just a stubborn endeavor at this point, in my opinion. Like, I think they would be so much better off retooling and building things around the offense. You have this offensive genius as a head coach. And I think what happened for so long is that Kyle maybe thought, hey, I can scheme guys open. I can get production out of, average players on offense, but we need a great defense. I would rather see them just go all in and be like, hey, I'm one of the better offensive minds in the league. Give me explosive athletes to pair with this dynamic quarterback, and we're just going to outscore the other team. And I know the whole adage of like defense wins championships and that stuff. It doesn't mean ignore the defense. It means don't make the defensive line be your first priority. Make setting Trey Lance up for success your number one priority.
Jordan, straight fire today. I absolutely love it. I think you're 100% correct on pretty much every point that you've made. I've personally lived this through one of my teams that I played on. It's my only personal reference that I have. Again, obviously, I played offensive line. The teams that I played on, we just got lucky, and we had phenomenal defensive line as well as linebackers. And this one team in particular, we had preseason All-Americans, linebackers, D linemen. They're great. And we had good secondary, but our safety got a D1 scholarship after 1 year. He's gone. And then we just had injuries to our secondary. As a result, that beautiful, insanely good front seven that we had was rendered useless because we had no back end coverage. There was nothing that they could do. Again, we had this that year. We had the second highest scoring offense in California that year, but that didn't change the fact that our defense couldn't stop anything. They literally couldn't because our DBs were destroyed. So that's my personal reference. I watched it for an entire year on our team. Watched D1 guys littered across our front seven, but they couldn't do a damn thing because our safeties and our cornerbacks just couldn't do anything. And when you look at that and you look at the game against the Arizona Cardinals and the 49ers are trotting out Josh Norman, Drake Kirkpatrick, what do you think's going on there? First of all, what are your thoughts on the play from Josh Norman? What is your thoughts on Drake Kirkpatrick and how he's been with this team so far, and that cornerback position? Because obviously loading up the D line, like you just talked about, it's not panning out like we had hoped for it. What's the answer on the back end, and what do you think? How do you assess those guys up until this point?
Well, I think you just kind of get what you're, expecting, or at least I like, when guys like Josh Norman and Jay Kirkpatrick are available week 1, week 2 of the season, there's usually a reason why they weren't brought in. And I don't think they're at points in their career where it's like, hey, we're worth this amount of money, nobody's going to pay us. It's more so just they're guys who were once effective cornerbacks who were older, and again, it's unrealistic. Like, you have to have realistic expectations when you're evaluating football teams and football players. And I just think that when you're getting guys that have been in the league for as long as those two have, that have the amount of miles that those two have, it's unrealistic to expect them to still be able to cover like they did 8 years ago. My biggest problem would be more so like that play with Josh Norman really kind of, I think, embodied why there is a little bit of a lack of leadership or a lack of, accountability. Because if you go back to that play, he really didn't have anything to do with that play and the stop that they made. And okay, if the Arizona Cardinals coaches are chirping at you, someone's chirping at you, like, great, you just held them, get off the field. You have all the momentum on your side. And, had Kingsbury been flagged for that penalty, I believe they would have been pushed back 15 yards. That would have, all of a sudden, that goes from being pretty, easy 3 points to a difficult field goal. If Arizona misses that field goal, maybe the Niners come down the field, get some points. Like, you never know what's going to happen because you literally just gave them all the momentum back after holding them on it was like 3rd and 22 or something like that. And I just thought it was a case of completely unnecessary. And this is where I struggle because, a lot of the thinking with, it feels like with Shanahan and this coaching staff is they don't want rookies out there taking their lumps and making mistakes and costing this team. But when you have a guy who's been in the league for 10 plus years doing something like that, I thought that it was, a bit ridiculous. And it feels like D'Amico Ryans, whoever the decision makers are on defense, felt the same way, because Kyle Shanahan said after the game, he wasn't, benching Josh Norman, but the defensive staff wanted Kirkpatrick in after that. And they were pretty adamant about that. And I don't think it was a performance thing. I don't think he was playing terribly. I think it was pretty clear that it was because he put himself above the team. And while it didn't end up costing them more points than it might have, they still kicked the field goal after the next set of downs they got. It just kind of, again, embodied like this directionless, like, lack of leadership that feels like it's there. So I think that Norman is a guy that just, like I said, he is what he is, and he's been getting torched all year. He's been an aggressive player for most of his career, which is why he gets flagged for a lot of these defensive pass interference penalties, because he's pulling and dragging and like hanging on to jerseys down the field. He's been doing it the entire time he's been in the NFL. Like, it's not changed. Like, I know not every 49ers fan is going to watch, the Washington football team play or the Carolina Panthers play. But if you go back and you watch Josh Norman throughout his career, like, it's really always who he's been. So again, it's a thing where, like, having realistic expectations, I'm not surprised at all to see this guy getting into it with the refs every single week, because it's kind of just been what the story of his career has been. And it comes back to, I don't fault the 49ers for not loading up. Like, they had a good starting secondary, in my opinion, of Jason Verrett, K'Wan Williams, and Emmanuel Mosley. I think that's a more than capable secondary. I think if all those guys had been healthy, it would look a lot different this year. But again, it comes back to all 3 of those guys have missed, fairly decent chunks of time since they've been in 49er uniforms. And I think that the contingency plans weren't great. I really like Diamador Lenore. I was very high on him before the draft. I was really excited when they picked him. Ambry Thomas, not so much. I hope that he ends up working out. But their whole logic of, we drafted these guys for, depth, not to play right away. Like, that's fine if you have proven guys that have a good track record of not getting hurt ahead of them. But it's kind of like extreme negligence, in my opinion, to come in knowing that Verrett, Williams, and Mosley have all missed time and just assume, like, hey, this is the year that they're all going to play 16 games. We won't need to rely on these guys behind them. And then on top of it too, I know Lenore hasn't been perfect. He got beat deep a couple times. Eric Crocker, which I'm sure most people who are 49ers fans are familiar with, pointed out that he did seem, when he was left on an island, he was getting beat vertically a couple times. But we've seen that from the veterans too. And I think that the good you got with Lenore is far better than the, good you've been getting from the veterans playing in his place. So I don't understand him not getting the, time he's getting. The only logical way I can wrap my head around it is maybe they view him as a nickel corner and they don't view him as an outside corner. And I do think he has a bit of room to improve defending the run. So maybe they just don't feel comfortable putting him out there yet. But again, it's easier to, get away with these personnel decisions if the guys playing in place of these rookies people want to see are producing. But not only are they not producing, they're doing things like Josh Norman did on Sunday. So it's been a mess. And honestly, it got even worse with Tart and Jimmy Ward out because, again, those guys have been so underrated for so long that, I hate to say it's kind of like an offensive lineman like we saw with Mike McGlinchey. Mike McGlinchey's been getting dumped on for years. People got to experience Tom Compton for a half, and I think a lot of people were wishing Mike McGlinchey was back. You get the same thing on the back end of the secondary where we thought it was really bad, and then it got even worse when the safeties went out. So it's a mess, dude. I don't mean to just keep rambling about it, but I just think that there's not really anything they can do at this point. And maybe, Kyle said that Ambry Thomas has made some steps in recent weeks. I think Lenore was pretty good. I thought that he was kind of drafted to be that nickel corner of the future. I don't think K'Wan Williams will be back next year. So maybe they reach a point this season where those guys will get some good developmental snaps in actual games. But like right now, like I don't know how you go into any game feeling confident about that secondary. They've just been pretty bad. Like there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, the secondary as a whole has been definitely underwhelming, but you did hit on two fantastic points. That Jaquiski Tartt and Jimmy Ward together have been helping so much, and they've been helping and aiding with the lack of presence that we've needed on the outside. I mean, Emmanuel Mosley, for the most part, has been pretty solid. He's had a game here or there that he'd probably like to have a couple plays back. For the most part, he's been our most consistent cornerback. But everyone after that, even K'Wan Williams is still showing that he is a force in the run game and he can still come up and play inside the box and do all those kinds of things. But we have seen him get burnt a couple times. Jimmy Ward and Jaquiski Tartt, talk about being the last line of defense. Those guys were really helping this team stop the bend don't break mentality. They weren't breaking because, at least in my opinion, that second line of defense of Jaquiski Tartt and Jimmy Ward being able to, if everyone else gets beat, those guys more often than not will get there and will stop those guys from going the distance. So losing them, you see the drop off. Obviously, Talanoa Hufanga steps in, Tavon Wilson steps in. I think what fans saw this week, at least from my perspective, from Talanoa Hufanga, is you did get to see a little bit of that scouting report pop up. The traits. You list everyone's traits, and one of the first things that I would list from Talanoa Hufanga is lack of long speed. Did you kind of see that? And what do you kind of see for Talanoa Hufanga in the future? Do you see him as being a strong safety or free safety? I know they're a little bit interchangeable in our defense, but do you see him kind of staying at safety, or could you see him eventually making that kind of hybrid jump to being a hybrid linebacker?
I think the best thing for him would be to make that jump because, admittedly, and it depends. It seems like D'Amico Ryans is more intent on running cover two high safety looks than what we saw with Saleh, where there was a lot of single high with Jimmy Ward kind of playing that center field role. I do think that Hufanga has gotten by on instinct more so than measurables, just like you mentioned. So when he does get isolated in coverage, like we saw when Christian Kirk just flew past him for that big gain, it does kind of reveal that he isn't this, exceptionally fast, athlete. But I do think that you can't undersell the value of having those instincts. And I do think his instincts within the box is where you're really going to maximize his value. And if they are able to turn him into a guy that can go out there, because the thing is nowadays, for a long time, it was you have base defense, you had a 3-4 or 4-3. You run those out there on first and second down most of the time. And then third down, you bring out your nickel set, you bring out your dime set. And nowadays, with the amount of teams that are throwing early on downs and teams that are, kind of spreading the field more. I think it would be great to have a guy like Talanoa Hufanga next to a Dre Greenlaw, a Fred Warner, and Aziz Al-Shaair, and have him kind of in that role where he still can use his instincts to defend the run. And he's not as much of a liability in coverage. I know they kind of tried to do that with Marcel Harris. I just don't think that was ever really going to work because I think that Harris just wasn't a guy kind of fit for that role. I do think Hufanga is, and I think that in an ideal world, you get a guy to pair with Jimmy Ward who can, still play an adequate level of coverage in those cover 2 looks, that too high look, and play, like the coverage drop off to me is too much for Hufanga to have a, prominent role as a safety if they continue to run the defense that D'Amico Ryans has wanted to run so far this year.
Absolutely. Let's go back. Let's go to the offensive side really quickly and talk about that because I think we've heard from Kyle Shanahan throughout his tenure here is that when the 49ers are running the football, that's their game. That's what they want to do. I can't remember if it's exactly 20 or 30 touches that he referenced, but if the 49ers are running the football 20 to 30 times, that like is I can't even talk. A statistic, there we go, that is used to be able to show that when the 49ers do X, they win games. Clearly, with Elijah Mitchell only getting 8 carries, what do you think is going on there? Do you buy the whole notion? Again, they were stacking the box with defensive linemen. They were throwing 8-9 guys in the box, and it was a premier look to throw it. Do you feel like that was really the case, or do you feel like there's just a little bit of an unwillingness to run the football that honestly to me kind of feels like it's been there all year? It's just which week do we actually see them get to the run game and which week do they not? What is your thought on that?
I think that there is some validity to it. If you go back and watch, like they really did, they put 6 on the line. They stacked the box, and this is again comes back to the problem where I know like there's a group of people who just like, if you criticize Jimmy Garoppolo at all, it's like, it's not his fault. He played well. Like, this is where it comes back to the quarterback. And this is why Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers have openly flirted with like every available quarterback for the last 2 years. They've been tied to them in some, manner, because when you are given those looks and teams do stack the box, you need to be able to execute. And I do think that this week, Jimmy did miss some throws, but he also did hit some throws. And we saw like that explosive play to Kittle where it was the same thing. They gave a premier look. I believe it was first down, and what should have been a 20-25 yard completion ends up with Kittle coughing the ball up and the other team getting the ball. We saw with Brandon Aiyuk when they're throwing downfield against these, looks where the other team is stacking the box. Aiyuk makes a catch. I would argue if the ball wasn't that high, Aiyuk wouldn't have to pop back up and doesn't fumble. But again, he needs to protect the football. There's blame on both sides. So I think that again, like it comes back to, I don't disagree with the play calling rhythm. I just don't think they're executing. And I think the problem is that we got spoiled for so long with how effective that run game was that we just expect it to work. And it still does from time to time. But when they tend to go away from it, then it becomes like, well, why don't you just run the football every down? And I think the mistake wasn't necessarily not running the football. I think the mistake wasn't finding more creative ways to get Elijah Mitchell the football. Like we saw Cliff Kingsbury realize that James Conner was having the game of his life, and he found creative ways to get him the ball with screens, swing passes, scheming looks open for him. I do know the 49ers have a pretty extensive route tree for the running backs within the playbook, and they have a lot of creative ways to get guys the ball. And that to me would be more concerning, not necessarily not running the ball specifically, but just not noticing that it seemed like Elijah Mitchell throughout that game was whenever he touched the ball, good things were happening. And when other players were touching the ball, it seemed like not many good things were happening. And I know that's overly simplified, but sometimes I really think that you do like Kyle does tend to overcomplicate things. And that would be my biggest thing is just find more creative ways to get the ball into the hands of playmakers. And I think that was the criticism with Aiyuk for a long time. It wasn't necessarily that he wasn't getting these targets downfield. It's that they weren't scheming things open for him behind the line of scrimmage, tunnel screens, bubble screens, end arounds, and stuff like that. So, again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know how to call an offense better than Kyle Shanahan, but I just think that he's gotten away from the fundamentals of just pepper your best players with targets, because it seems like Debo and Kittle are the guys that are consistently getting those looks. But Mitchell and Aiyuk were the guys that played the best on Sunday, in my opinion, and they weren't getting them, if that makes sense.
100%. And of course, as a former offensive lineman myself, I'm just going to flat out say that they're not running the football enough. That's what we want to do up front. We want to set the tone by be able to bring the punishment to the defense. When you're passing all the time, that's where you kind of lose that edge as an offensive lineman, is because you become more passive in regards to pass setting rather than attacking and going after these guys. And with JJ Watt being out, I really wanted to see a concerted effort for them to hit inside zones, and they really did not do that. You saw maybe one or two power concepts where they're pulling, which they have been loving this year. But again, just the simplicity of running your zone scheme and just getting that going, getting it in rhythm. I personally, I do agree with you on the one side that you can get away from the run game while still being able to be creative by getting guys like Elijah the Mitchell, getting him the ball, just like James Conner did, as you referenced. But for me, I just really want to see the run game, and I want to see them try the run game, because we understand, and you made the point, the very first run of the game, a flowing linebacker, number 51, hits Elijah Mitchell at the line of scrimmage. But Elijah Mitchell is the one who's able to spin out of it, break a tackle, and turn it into a 9-yard gain when it should have been a no gain. I just wanted to see. As an offensive lineman, again, I will admit this is offensive line bias. I want to see this group grind the ball. I want to see them run the football. And I get the looks and all that type of design and things like that. I'm going back into a little bit hard-headed zone of let's get back to running the football. And I get it. And you make a lot of really, really good points about that. And I totally understand. I just want to see this team actually effectively try to run the football. To me, running the ball with Elijah Mitchell 8 times against the Cardinals, even under the circumstances of the 2 quick turnovers, I still would have liked to see the ball run more. And hopefully they get back to that, or who knows, because with the offensive line, Tommy says, did the O-line improve on pass pro and regress in the run? I felt like they took a step forward in the past game with the emergence of Mike McGlinchey. We've looked at the tandem of Mike McGlinchey and Brunskill when working together. They do not miss on D-line stunts. They know how to pass those off. We showed an example yesterday on the live of why that's been so good for them. And we're going to find out now with potentially Tom Compton or Jalen Moore on that right side. But now it's going to be even harder to run the football. It's going to be even harder to do those things and be a little bit stubborn in the run game, where we might even see them go further away from that. So again, I just keep relying on, again, Raheem Mostert's not walking through that door. Raheem Mostert was a huge reason why the run game was so successful in years past. It was the combination of the O-line and the running back. And obviously, we still see, even though as good as Elijah Mitchell has been, he still has room to improve in regards to vision and hitting his holes and doing all that. There's still room for improvement. So we'll see what happens. But hopefully they will eventually get back to the run game. Let's answer this question. We'll start with you, Jordan, from Tommy. What do you think? Did the O-line improve on pass pro and regress on run? What is your thoughts?
So yeah, they definitely improved in pass protection. They've been I don't know if it changed. This past week was pretty brutal. Going into the Arizona game, they were a top 5 unit. I imagine they're not there anymore, particularly after the Tom Compton show that we saw in the second half. But I do think that the run game, I don't think they regressed. I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that so much of what they run is predicated on that outside zone. And as Brad can explain to you, with outside zone, there isn't a predetermined gap for the running back to go to. It's kind of all about feel and instinct. And I just think that we saw Elijah Mitchell struggle with that, and he's gotten much better over the course of the season. But I don't know how comfortable they feel with Trey Sermon doing that, and maybe that's why he isn't getting the looks that he is. Because if you go back, the game that Trey Sermon had the most touches and when he looked the most effective was against Seattle, and it was when Trey Lance came into the game. And I believe that a lot of that had to do with the inside looks they were running. And it looked like they even ran a couple of zone keepers when Jimmy Garoppolo was in the game. And I think that inside zone looks off the zone read, that in like that power running in between the tackles is where Trey Sermon really is going to be at his best. And it seems like they're still pretty intent on running that outside zone because just like Brad said, you didn't see that much. Whereas Arizona on the other side, it looked like they ran the same inside zone play about a dozen times and it beat the 49ers. It felt like almost every single time they ran it. So I don't think that the run, like the O-line has regressed. I just think the operation as a whole has taken a step back because there's not the continuity and there isn't we talk so much about Raheem Mostert's speed, which as we should, he's one of the fastest, if not the fastest player in the league in the open field. But his vision is so good and his feel for that zone and finding that hole in the defense is so underrated. And I think that they miss that so much. I think Hasty has shown the ability to do that at times. He unfortunately has just been pretty banged up this year. So I don't think he's gotten the amount of run they would have liked to give to him. So I wouldn't say that the O-line has regressed. I just think the running game as a whole has regressed. And I think a lot of it is just there hasn't been a good amount of continuity between O-line and running backs. And the only player who's gotten that level of continuity is Elijah Mitchell. And we've seen him go from a guy who was struggling a little bit to start the year to a guy who's looked like one of the better running backs in football the last few weeks when he's getting an adequate amount of touches. So I just think it's something that'll work itself out over time. The unfortunate thing is when you're sitting there at 3-5 and you're losing games the way the Niners have been losing, fans don't want to hear, oh, this stuff's going to take time to work out. They want to hear how you're going to fix things now. So I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but I ultimately think it is something that really can only be fixed with time.
Right, and we've been hearing that with Brandon Aiyuk. Oh, just wait. Brandon Aiyuk explosion's coming. Just wait. Well, it took until week 9, the 8th game of the year for the 49ers, to see the Brandon Aiyuk explosion. What did you think about Brandon Aiyuk's performance? Obviously, the fumble occurred, but I think you hit on a really good point. You can even bring it back up again. Just tell me about what you thought about Brandon Aiyuk's emergence. If you want to get into why it took so, however, just tell me what you think. What are your thoughts on that?
He's a baller, dude, and there's like no other way to put it. I think that he really showed off his physical ability. That touchdown that he got with 3 defenders around him really showed off what I think is his best trait, which is his catch radius. I think he's only like 6 foot, maybe 6'1". I know he's not like a big guy, but his wingspan is like 86 inches or 85 inches or something ridiculous. And I think that he showed off that ability to make these contested catches in traffic. And while he had the fumble, so I don't want to, say this right after, like I acknowledge the fumble, but he has just like vacuum hands. Like the guy makes catches. Like if you go back to like that catch he made, I think it was his only catch in the game against Philadelphia in week 2 on like a critical 3rd down. Like he's a dependable target and a guy that you can throw a 50-50 ball to that's going to give you a chance to pull it in. And I think that that's something that the 49ers have been sorely lacking for years. They haven't really they've had so many guys who are good after the catch, who are good, at getting separation, but they haven't had a true like 50-50 guy. And I think that's kind of what they envision part of Jalen Hurd's role being, which is why it's unfortunate his career has gone the way it has. But I just think that Aiyuk is a guy that really fits that mold of, an alpha X wide receiver 1. And while Debo's having a fantastic year, and I think that Debo is a fantastic player, I just think that Aiyuk's skill set is so much more tailored to be that dominant wide receiver 1, whereas Debo is able to be that guy that can get schemed open and can be that guy generating yards after the catch. So it was nice to finally see it. I just think that it's unfortunate that for whatever reason it's taken this long for him and Kyle Shanahan to get on the same page, because he did acknowledge that he spoke with Kyle Shanahan leading up to this game and after the Chicago game, and they clearly had some kind of discussion that left both leaving feeling much better than they had before. And again, I think it just comes back to sometimes these things sort themselves out over time. And if the 49ers had been winning games, I don't think it would be anywhere near as concerning. But when they aren't winning games and then you see Aiyuk playing like this, it does tend to beg the question, like, what the hell took you so long to sit down with this guy and figure out what's going on?
It does. And it can be it can be frustrating for a lot of us. And I think when we put our player development caps on, at least from my perspective, this is where my biggest beef with the coaching staff up until this point is you see this across the roster in a lot of places, just a lot of players that should be playing at a higher level. They're just not. Rookies coming in who they've had to lean on. In and out of the doghouse, it feels like. And it just really feels like this doghouse situation is real. Do you think there's anything to that? Do you think they're we should be concerned about the player development, how it's managed, or is this just, part of kind of being in the midst of a losing season or a losing season up until this point?
Well, first of all, to answer the last part, like winning cures everything. If they're winning games, I don't think people would care about anything they're doing. Like people just want
No.
results, and I don't blame
Right?
them.
Yeah.
I do think so. Like Richard Sherman said something, I think it was last season, and I apologize if it's not the direct quote. So I may be, misquoting a bit here. He was asked about the difference between Kyle and Pete Carroll, I believe was the question, or at least that's what his answer entailed. And he said that Kyle was much more of a straight shooter, and he's a guy who doesn't care about draft position. He doesn't care about capital or your salary or any of that stuff. He's a guy who's going to play who he believes is the best guy. And while I think that is, ideally in a vacuum, like a good thing, you don't want, locker room politics or the amount of money a player makes to have them, influence them starting over a player who deserves it more. But I do think that is concerning when you think about the fact that, yes, the 49ers just went to a Super Bowl a couple years ago. Yes, they have a lot of veteran talent, but the NFL careers are so short and there's so much roster turnover that's constant. If you're going to be a head coach somewhere for a long time, you need to find a way to balance that with also developing players and getting them the adequate amount of reps they need to get better. So maybe he really did feel like Trent Sherfield was running routes better, was understanding the playbook better, was doing things at a level that he thought was better. But at the same time, you're also hindering the development of a guy that you invested significant draft capital into in 2020, just a year ago, who showed during his rookie year that he's capable of carrying a heavy receiving load. And I just think that, again, it comes back to, I have been very staunch in my defense of Kyle Shanahan not being somebody that I would want to fire right now, but he also has a lot of ways that he can improve. And I do think that the 49ers have done a decent job. Like they've developed guys like Al-Shaair and Mosley and some of these players that were undrafted guys, day 3 guys, even Elijah Mitchell in a short amount of time has gone from a 6th round pick to a guy who has a prominent role in the team. But I think they need to do a much better job of doing that with guys who are, prominent players taken early. And I just think that it comes back to, again, if you truly feel that Trent Sherfield is playing better and that's what's dictating him playing right now, even though Aiyuk was the higher draft pick and has all this capital invested in him, then you better make sure that Trent Sherfield is getting touches and playing like a guy who deserves that, kind of bump up on the depth chart. And I don't think we've seen that. And that's where the issue lies, is whatever Kyle's decisions are going into these weeks with his depth chart and with his allocating touches isn't reflecting on the actual production we're seeing on the field. And then it gets people questioning his line of thinking, which I think is fair, because you're not getting the results that you're basically saying, like Aiyuk isn't good enough to beat out Trent Sherfield. And what's Trent Sherfield doing? It doesn't add up at the end of the day. And I think that's what's the most concerning.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that aren't really adding up with this season. It started back in January, and we're in the midst of it still up until this very minute. It feels like. So let's put a bow on the Arizona game. Is there anything that you wanted to finish on with Arizona? Is there anything else that you maybe wanted to touch on before we kind of look forward towards the Rams?
Yes, I just want to throw it out there. Anybody who's watching, who's followed me on Twitter, has probably seen me talk about it for a while, and maybe they thought I was joking. I kind of was. But Cliff Kingsbury has been disrespected for way too long. And I think that the guy is very good at getting the ball to his playmakers in space, and he's very good at, showing different looks and adapting and changing. And, I just think that he's a guy that people have overlooked for the entirety of the time he's been in Arizona. And I understand he had he didn't have the great record at Texas Tech, and maybe people didn't think he was qualified for the job. I thought Steve Wilkes got fired way too soon when they brought him in, but I just have to say, I thought that was a great example of Cliff Kingsbury, doing what Kyle Shanahan has gotten credit for so long, which is maximizing the value of players who are depth pieces and aren't starters when you're up against the wall. He had Colt McCoy out there, I think he was 22 of 25 or 22 of 26 or something like that. And he had the game plan was just get the ball out quick, get the ball to guys in space, and don't lose the game. We'll see if we can hang in there, but just don't lose the game for us. And I just think that Cliff Kingsbury is a guy that is earning his respect as not only a great play caller and play designer, but a quality NFL coach. So I thought that Kyle Shanahan just simply got out-coached by Kingsbury as well. And again, I'm a Shanahan guy. I like Kyle Shanahan, but I think that he got outclassed by Cliff Kingsbury, and that's something that is not it's concerning to say the least. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it's not something to feel great about going forward.
I agree. It was a tough experience being on the other side of that. And I agree with every single point you made. Cliff Kingsbury showed up to work that day, and he showed up with his entire crew that was hurt. They were down and out. They had no business winning that game. Let's be real. And he did what any good coach does. You get your players to elevate their level of play. Unfortunately, with Kyle Shanahan in 2021, we've seen more players that should be up here take steps back. And again, that is an indictment on coaching. It is what it is. Kyle Shanahan came out and said it yesterday. Any coach will live and die by that. And I think it's interesting that Kyle Shanahan went out of his way to say that, because in my personal opinion, that's an indictment on him. It's up to the coaches to get these players to play to that level, and seemingly every player is a grade below or further. So that's a little bit something to be wary of, but I think you make a good point there. Now, with all this good energy and the good vibrations that we have now about talking about the Arizona game, how do we leverage that into a win? Is there a possibility they get a win against the Rams? What's the vibe now with a Monday Night Football game coming up? The Rams, clearly huge storyline, get Odell Beckham Jr. What's your sense leading up until the Rams game right now?
So I think that if I was somebody who hasn't, obviously didn't follow the 49ers closely, follow the Rams closely this past 2 years, and I watched, each team play going into this game, I would probably pick the Rams to win by double digits and not think twice about it. And they very well could. The thing to me is it's this matchup for the last couple seasons has made absolutely no sense. And there's the 49ers have obviously won 4 in a row against them. I just feel like the difference in those games were a couple missed throws or big turnovers from Jared Goff. And while we saw, Matthew Stafford had one of the worst interceptions of the season against Tennessee last Sunday night. He's not, above throwing interceptions or making, having turnover-worthy plays himself. I just can't get past the fact that the massive upgrade that Matthew Stafford is over Jared Goff should vault the Rams beyond this, like they played down to the 49ers both times they played last season. The Rams should have won both of those games based on the team teams fielded on the field each of those Sundays. So logically, yes, like the Rams should run away with this. And I do wonder how much like Sean McVay is kind of like, man, I've been having Jared Goff hold me back for a couple years. The narrative is that I can't beat Kyle or I can't beat this defense when they have a good team. I wouldn't be surprised to see him just unload the clip this week and, make like a statement kind of like I'm the premier guy in this division. Like this is what it looks like when I have competent QB play. But I can't get over the fact that there's just something about this matchup that defies the laws of science. Like if you look at Daniel Brunskill, like I think he's like a decent, average offensive lineman. Like he could start on a fair number of teams. But I don't think he's anything special really. But for whatever reason, this guy plays the games of his life against a generational talent that's arguably the best interior defensive lineman of all time. Like and it's not just that he's like holding his own, he's like dominating Aaron Donald one-on-one in these pass sets. And it's like something that I just can't wrap my head around. So like if I'm picking this game, I'm definitely picking the Rams. I think the Rams are just more talented. I think that they have the ability to kind of take advantage of that 49ers secondary. That defense is so good. They're adding Von Miller to a defensive front that already has Aaron Donald and Leonard Floyd with Ramsey on the back end. Darius Williams is out, but they've had guys that have filled in for him admirably. So, like, I don't want to sound like I'm hedging because I would definitely say I'm picking the Rams, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if the 49ers somehow find a way to win this game. And everyone's just kind of like what is going on with this team? Like you can't beat Colt McCoy, but you're going to beat the surging Rams after they just added 2, all pro level or former all pro, players. So I don't know what to make of it, Brad, honestly. It's probably going to be somewhere in between there, but I just logically, like I can't, think of a scenario where the 49ers are going into this game and I'm feeling great. Like, yeah, like I don't care if they've beaten the Rams 4 times in a row. Again, Jared Goff is the difference in almost every single one of those games. And Matthew Stafford is so much better than Jared Goff. And I'm a Cal guy. I will defend Goff anytime I can. I'm not going to lie to myself or anyone else and act like Matthew Stafford isn't massive upgrade in that regard.
I agree with you. It's a head scratcher because we have seen instances where the Rams look like the better team last year and they still come out. The 49ers still it almost is like that big brother little brother vibe a little bit. Like, sometimes the little brother could be better and more skilled and more talented, but there's just like some weird like mentality of energy and just like, hey, I taught you everything you're just never going to beat me. And it's just like there's like a almost like a mental wall that's seemingly what I would like in the past wins to be. This, like you said, this could be the McVay coming out party against Kyle Shanahan of like, listen, big bro, that those same vibes of you beating me up and giving me wedgies and dunking my head in the toilet, those days are over. I'm running the show now. I got the firepower. I got Matthew Stafford. I got Cooper Kupp. Daryl Henderson's doing a pretty darn good job. I got these guys now. Doesn't matter if we're coming to your home that you haven't been able to win a game at since 2019. It just the logic, like you said, doesn't really feel like it's headed in the direction of the 49ers being able to come out and win that game. But we have seen crazier things happen. We saw the 49ers when logic would tell you Arizona Cardinals traveling to the Bay to play a healthy team, getting George Kittle back. There's a lot of noise made of Jeff Wilson. However, he never took a snap. But the mentality was, oh, the 49ers are healthier than they've been in a couple weeks. And on top of that, the Arizona Cardinals are destroyed. Logic would tell you that, oh, this should be a runaway game for the 49ers, or at least we should be seeing a W at the end of the day, regardless of how it comes. That didn't happen. So, but you can literally probably use that same exact logic and thought process for this game. Just flip it. Like the Rams get OBJ, they get Von Miller, they're adding more firepower. They have everything's going in their direction. Who knows? On a Monday night, we understand how this team has performed with the bright lights shining on them as of late, and it hasn't been great. So maybe there's that weird kind of energy flip here. Who knows? But I think at the end of the day, if we were to poll the chat or poll 49er fans, and we did yesterday, there's not a lot of confidence going into this game. There's not a lot of like, we talked about it earlier. We try to stay optimistic and we try to look at everything and try to make it make sense in certain ways. But like you said, the logic, it's just not aligning. It didn't align last week. It hasn't aligned all year. Who knows? We've seen it align in our favor in years past. Maybe it happens again. I don't know, Jordan. I don't know.
See, and the thing you mentioned, so this is kind of where I'm at now. Like, I don't blame anybody for not having a lot of hope, and I don't blame anybody for being upset. And I know it doesn't help going into this game, but this is kind of my view on the 49ers now. Like, the sport starts and stops with the quarterback position. It is so important. And yeah, every so often you'll have a rare example where a middling quarterback gets super hot for a short period of time, or they ride a really good defense with this guy who's competent enough. But the way the NFL is trending, you need a really good quarterback if you're going to be a consistent contender. I, for a long time, have not felt like Jimmy Garoppolo has been that. I've been very vocal about it. I've been wanting to move on for a long time. And while they're reluctant to do so after they move all that capital, it's like the dynamic is just beyond strange. Mm-hmm. The plan is clearly in place for Trey Lance to take over. So this is my thinking as well. I think, again, it's on Kyle and the offensive staff or whoever the decision makers, making these calls are. It's their fault if you keep trotting out Jimmy Garoppolo and you expect different results. I understand if they don't feel that Trey Lance is ready. So while the season may feel hopeless now and this year may end up being a wash, I do think that there is if you look at the range of outcomes, there's a very strong possibility that next year they tool an offense around Trey Lance. We start to see a guy like Aaron Banks, who's a little bit more suited for that zone, inside zone power stuff, come in, fill that hole on the right side of the line. You see them maybe add some skill guys that can get downfield, get open downfield. and ultimately build an offense around Trey Lance. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if this time next year we're seeing some sort of hybrid between Kyle's outside zone RPO offense and Greg Roman's zone read offense that he's been running with. He ran with Kaepernick, he runs with Lamar Jackson now, and you see some kind of like mesh of those two things, and the 49ers take the league by storm because they have this dynamic play caller with finally a dynamic talent at quarterback. So I'm not completely out. Like, I was trying to think of the way to word this, and the way I was thinking of is that, like, I understand, like, not having hope, but, like, don't lose faith, if that makes sense. And I completely understand if people are, like, just out. They don't want to hear that right now. I get it. Like, I'm not going to argue with you or try to change how you feel. But I'm just saying, like, there is a very, strong range of outcomes where next year they don't butcher the offseason. They cleanly cut, ties with the veteran. They build everything around Trey Lance. I'm not saying that Trey Lance is going to come in and be like Patrick Mahomes his first year starting and light the league on fire and win an MVP. But the ability to stretch the field, throw downfield, run, all the things that he brings to the table that, an average, physically limited quarterback like Jimmy doesn't have, should open up this offense in a way where I'm not willing to just be totally out on the current regime and be totally out on this team and have any, lack of hope moving forward. I do think, though, it is very hard for people to hear, like, hey, just like, don't be sad that they suck this year. They're going to be really good next year when the rookie plays. So I get it. I'm just saying that, like, the long-term view isn't as bad as it may seem, but I understand wanting results in the short term. And I just don't feel great that they're going to produce that. But I think until we see what this team looks like being built around Trey Lance, it's too early for me personally to just completely write them off and be done with them.
I think that's a great point, and we can always look at it from that standpoint of just because this year's plan didn't work doesn't mean next year's plan's not going to work, because we already understand with the 49ers, they only have 33 guys under contract, and we know even some of those 33 guys that are currently under contract, they're not going to be here next year. So next year's going to look fundamentally different from a roster construction standpoint. You've already alluded to some of the moves that they made this year, almost seeming like they're kind of preparing for that big change. And guess what? We can look at this year, we can be disappointed, we could want some changes to happen, but understanding that there is still another year coming under this regime, and with that other year coming comes a year built actually around Trey Lance. I think part of the expectations that I set for myself this year is thinking that Trey Lance actually could be the starter and actually beat out Jimmy in just a good old fashioned football competition, when in reality that just wasn't the case. The reality was that this year was going to be Jimmy Garoppolo's year, regardless of what happens. And Kyle Shanahan has stated time and time again that when the 49ers are out of playoff contention, that's when we'll see Trey Lance. And they're right around the corner. And it sounds like, let's say against the LA Rams, if they're getting washed out pretty early, that seems like a pretty good opportunity to throw out Trey Lance in front of the national media, maybe build a little bit of glimpse of hope for the rest of this year. And then that's what this year would become, is maybe start developing guys for 2022, seeing what you have, seeing what you don't have. So I think you said it great, Jordan. I think, we have to have a little bit of faith. We might not be happy about what's going on this year. We might not be thrilled with the management and everything and how it's gone up until this point. However, we understand there's going to be a pretty big reset coming, and there's going to be a lot of moves that are going to be made. Additional cap space is going to open up. Jimmy Garoppolo likely not on the roster next year as well. That hopefully opens up a good portion of cap space. So I know we're stuck in right now mode, and we're stuck in what's in front of us. And it doesn't feel optimal at this point. However, there are still things that we can take away from this year that haven't happened yet. And who knows? It is if Trey Lance, like, again, this is way down the road and we're looking a little bit too far ahead at this point. But let's say Trey Lance does start the last 4 games of the year and he gets better each and every game. And hey, maybe they win that last game against the Rams, and we're like, oh, we might be out of playoff contention, or we might be scratching at the door of playoff contention. But as long as they can end this year on a high note with some of the pieces that they're building with, it won't feel as bad, I don't think. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So it's funny. Like, I'll be very transparent. Like, my livelihood doing this kind of stuff, writing, doing content creation, is steeped in minimizing the amount of times that I look like an idiot, and that's just the most frank way I can put it. Because if people, there's a lot of people doing this. If you have any ounce of credibility, people are going to pay. They're going to want to hear what you have to say on a certain topic, right?
Right.
So while nobody's ever going to bat 1,000, I am always happy to admit when I'm wrong. If I'm looking at the way this situation unfolds, completely writing off what Kyle might be able to do as a play designer, building an offense around Trey Lance. And again, this comes back to people are like, well, how come you didn't do it this year? They said from the beginning that they didn't think he would be ready. They said from the beginning that it was going to be a long-term thing. They wanted time to develop him. He's coming from the FCS. He's just turned 21 this year. Like, that does fall in line with what they've said. And I just think that jumping out to conclusions now, and as bad as it's been, I get it, 4 losing seasons in 5 years. The play calling has been questionable to some people this year. Like, I get it. I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan is perfect or that he's earned so much of the benefit of the doubt, but based simply on the play designer, Shanahan, based simply on the offensive mind that I've seen go to work these last 5 seasons, I am not ready to say that it's going to be a monumental failure when he finally gets to build an offense around his handpicked quarterback, because that right there leaves me out to dry looking like an idiot next year should he come out and do that. And I think that possibility of that happening is so high that I still believe in him. But I understand how that might fall into a category of things people don't want to hear right now, because they are very frustrated with the performance. They're very frustrated that Kyle, as the head coach, is coaching a team that isn't executing. But I'm just saying that until we really see this, fully play out with Trey Lance, I'm not ready to jump off the ship and be like, I'm done with Kyle Shanahan. I want no parts of him. And again, it comes back to a lot of people don't want to hear that right now. I'm just making that very clear so that next year you will see, should Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers start, lighting up the league, these people that have been his biggest critics are either going to give Trey Lance all the credit, or they're going to come back to, well, he should have just done it last year, when that was never the plan from the beginning. So whether you agree with it or not, and I think I saw somebody in the comments mention it a little bit ago, like, Jed York clearly gave Kyle Shanahan an extended window when he allowed him to move the capital he did to handpick his own quarterback. They're not going to
file give him the 6-year extension before that as well.
They could lose every game for the rest of the year, and I don't think he would be fired, because, again, it comes back to you invested everything in this pairing of Kyle Shanahan and Trey Lance. So until I see that play out, I'm not totally out yet. But I just think that Kyle Shanahan does deserve the criticism, that, a fair share of it. Not all. Some of it's been extremely overboard. But he has to show us. He has to earn that back and be like, yes, this is what, this is why people around the league. And it's not a media thing. I see people always say it's such a media-driven thing. It's not. If you ask coaches, players, like people around the league, like, people respect the acumen that this guy has. It doesn't mean that he's perfect and he shouldn't be criticized, but there is a reason why he gets that respect. Trent Williams could have been blocking for Patrick Mahomes this year. He chose the 49ers over the Kansas City Chiefs. And I believe he's openly stated that a lot of that had to do with him enjoying playing for Kyle Shanahan and within his scheme. So, yeah, he's had his faults, and he's been, a guy that, if you don't get the full context, you're like, 4 losing seasons in 5 years, how does he still have a job? But none of that matters, because this discussion about getting rid of him now is pointless, because it's not going to happen. And I just would rather still maintain the optimism that there is a strong possibility that he lights the league on fire next year with a guy who's big and fast and can run and can actually throw the ball downfield and outside the numbers consistently. And I'm just willing, I guess, to have that patience now. But again, it comes back to just like, people don't want to hear that now while they're not playing well in the present. And I totally understand that. I'm just saying, like, be careful about completely being out on Kyle Shanahan, because he might just win you back next year. And some people might not care, but me personally, for somebody who does content creation, as kind of like my thing, like, I don't want it to come back and have these clips and receipts coming back where it's like, you were totally out on Kyle Shanahan, because I haven't gotten to that point yet. So I'm just kind of trying to convince people to join me and not completely jump ship yet. And I understand if you don't want to, but I'm just saying, like, not yet, guys. Hold out hope.
Exactly. And Jordan is 100% right. And he stated it clearly too in the beginning. We can still have our disagreements with maybe how things are being managed. We can heap some criticism on Kyle Shanahan's plate, but there isn't enough here to be able to be like, oh, it's over. It's a wrap. We understand partially why this is occurring. At least from my standpoint, you've heard Steve Young echo it every single week about the locker room, about how it feels disjointed. It's what both Jordan and I have talked about in the past. We warned against it. We were like, well, we know it could be coming, but hopefully they overcome it. They have the leaders in the locker room to do so. Maybe it won't be that big of a deal. Unfortunately, it hasn't been that. And so it is what it is at this point. We understand that there are some circumstances outside of the actual execution of football at play here. And that can be frustrating. I'm frustrated by it. I've been frustrated all day on the timeline, but that doesn't mean I'm out on Kyle. That doesn't mean that I think Kyle deserves to be fired. Still, while I am voicing my frustrations about player development, things like this, it's still, I understand this is a complex web of things. There are so many different levels of managing players, managing personalities, managing the business of football before we actually get to the football itself. And that's where we're having our issues. Our issues right now is that the management of football has flooded into the actual football itself. And so we're seeing the fruits of that. That doesn't mean that's a death wish. It doesn't mean that Kyle cannot overcome that. He will overcome that because he's going to have a new roster next year. It's just, again, who he keeps, how they package everything, and how they move forward is going to really be the defining moment under Kyle Shanahan. And guess what? Just like Jordan said, that comes next year. Regardless of how happy we are. Again, just like Jordan said, they could lose every freaking game this year. Kyle isn't going anywhere. He's not. It's just a simple fact. Barring a Gruden-esque type flop or something like that gets you out of the job, Kyle's going to be here. And I think we're okay with that. I think part of like what I'm going through today, and you've seen on the timeline, is me just understanding and moving away from my own personal expectations and just trying to rationalize everything, get the emotions out of my system, because at the end of the day, Jordan's 100% right. Kyle ain't going nowhere. He will be here. He will be running this team. And guess what? He's going to be building another roster next year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens about that, and we'll see how it continues to progress. We're heading towards a minute or hour 20. Before we transfer to the weekend, Jordan, and get ready for that phenomenal Monday Night Football game coming up, anything you would like to end on or discuss further?
I don't want to speak for Brad, but I have a feeling he will be very in line with this. Should the 49ers continue to lose games, I understand they don't have a first-round pick, but that second-round pick is going to be pretty high. And a lot of you guys watched earlier. Brad and I love doing draft stuff. So I can at least promise if it does get to that point where it's that bad, I will do my part, and I know Brad will too, where you're going to be scouting like crazy, watching these college games, pouring some tape, so we can at least provide some optimism going forward. And I'm not quite there yet. I'm still kind of holding up hope that they could somehow, string together some wins and find a way to right the ship, because they do still have the talent. But at this point, like they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt for how they've played. So having said that, if it does start to get to the point where we're shifting towards 2022 mode, be on the lookout, because the best, in my opinion, the teams that end up being contenders are the teams that do well in the middle rounds. First round picks are great. When you hit on your second and third round picks, which the 49ers still have both of, or I believe they gave theirs up, but they still have the compensatory pick they got from Martin Mayhew. So they should have a second and a third coming up in this draft. We will at least offer some kind of optimism. So I understand if you want to be cynical and just be miserable. I have those days myself where I'm like, dude, I don't want to hear it. Like, this team isn't good. They suck. Like, stop it. But if you want some level of optimism, maybe we could do something tailored towards some of these guys we're going to be watching. I know Brad and I are going to both be in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. Remember, 2022 is really when this whole Trey Lance era was scheduled to begin in the first place. Right. And I think, honestly, the only reason we've even got, like, a preview of it this year and even have had him in games the way he's been in games is A, because Jimmy got hurt, and B, because he kind of was playing poorly. If Jimmy had a season like Alex Smith had, like I know everybody compares it to Smith and Mahomes, we wouldn't see Trey Lance play at all. Maybe he plays the last game of the year like Mahomes did when they already locked up a playoff
and no one would be upset either.
Exactly. But that hasn't gone that way, obviously. I get it. I'm just saying 2022 is really when this starts to take off. So it's easy for me to sit here and preach patience because that's just how I feel. And I understand if people don't feel that way. But if you're able to kind of look at that long-term outlook and find some kind of inner peace, trust me, it will feel so much better. Because if you get wrapped up in like trying to rationalize how the season has unfolded and how they can get better, it's just going to drive you nuts. Because I've been trying to do it for months, and it's trust me, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of like why I woke up today so grumpy is because I've done all the rationalizing. It's all done. It is what it is at this point. And so that's just kind of we're along for the ride. And it could get better. It could get a little bit more gloomy, but at the end of the day, we all understand that there is a plan building towards 2022. Now, a lot of people might not be confident with the guys executing that plan based on this specific year and how it's gone. But I think both Jordan and I feel confident giving Kyle the benefit of the doubt to at least right the ship and get things back on track because we understand Kyle wanted a different quarterback. That at the end of the day, Kyle is sticking with Jimmy. He's backing Jimmy. He continues to say Jimmy's the starter. But when you strip away all of that, Kyle Shanahan is the one who wanted another quarterback. He is the one who wanted to move off Jimmy, and it didn't happen. But he is being a good company guy, and he's sticking it out, and he's trying to defend his guy, and he's got to, he has to. That's just where we're at this point. So eventually, we'll see that transition towards 2022. We'll see it transition towards Trey Lance, and then we'll have a new, fresh slate to judge who Kyle Shanahan really is underneath a different layer of circumstances because I think it's clear the cloud has followed us. The cloud of the offseason followed us into the season, and we're dealing with it. So the season isn't over, so that's also not what we're also talking about. Is this isn't an episode where we're driving a stake in the ground and saying, "Oh, the season's over." There might be some feelings and emotions that match that, but at the end of the day, they still have an opportunity. They come out and somehow shock the entire world and get a victory against the Rams. They're again back in the hunt. Do you think if they do get a win against the Rams that they can somehow build momentum to stack a game against the Jags and all of a sudden we're talking about this season in a completely different light?
I mean, it's a possibility, but I thought they would do that against Arizona, and they'd be coming into this game going 500, and they played one of the worst football games I've ever seen them play. So I wish I could say that. And like, I want to make one thing clear too, because like I can see the comments too, like nobody's okay with them losing. We're not sitting here like, oh, they're losing, like it's okay, just like let it go. Like that's not at all what's going on. What's going on is that the plan all along when they took Trey Lance was to build for the long term. And what the 49ers tried to do was they tried to win in the short term while also developing for the long term. And it clearly hasn't worked. Just because the short term is going poorly doesn't mean that the long term is going poorly. We haven't seen Trey Lance at all. In the limited action we did see, there was a lot to get excited about. And even though the stuff wasn't executed properly, they only had a week of practice to prep for it. If you go back and you watch, like Brad and I have done, and you see the coaches film, watching at these angles you don't get from the broadcast, they're a missed block here, a slip block there, a little bit of timing there from having Trey Lance busting these huge runs against Arizona where we're all talking about, wow, look at what Kyle Shanahan can do with a dynamic running talent. And it's unfair to expect an O-line and a quarterback with like 3 days of practice to perform the same way they would with an entire offseason of OTAs, mini camp, training camp, preseason. So yeah, like it sucks now. Like nobody's sitting here like we're not having a good time because they're losing, but I'm just trying to say that it doesn't mean that they're going to be terrible forever. And just like, we've tried to say, like, even if you want Kyle Shanahan, like a million people on Twitter or on YouTube or on Facebook can get on and say they want Kyle Shanahan fired. He's not going anywhere, which is why I think it's just a pointless exercise to talk about it because it's not going to happen. And if he fails with Trey Lance, and Trey Lance either doesn't develop properly, they don't win with him, they don't build around him properly, absolutely, by all means, he should go. But his entire tenure is riding on that, and that the plan all along, like they're not backtracking and saying like, oh, we had Trey as the starter, but now we're going to make him wait. They always said they wanted him to redshirt a year, and they're just sticking to what they told us all along. And I just think that, again, it comes back to the whole outlook of this franchise was the next 4 to 5 years, not immediately this year once they made that pick. And while I understand it sucks to lose in the interim right now in the present, that doesn't mean that Trey Lance is going to bust and they're going to be terrible like that. And that's just my whole point is I don't understand having that like negative outlook going forward just because things suck right now, when so much of the things that suck right now can be changed with a dynamic talent at quarterback, which I think many of us would agree Trey Lance is. So I just think it's a little bit early to get upset about something that's not going to change anyway. Like, I'm not going to sit here and yell into a camera every week about firing Kyle Shanahan. Happen. Like,
Right. There's no point because it's literally not a range of outcome that's going to occur. So it's not something that we're going to waste our energy on. You got anyone has the right to be upset with Kyle, this regime, how it's been managed. We get it. We are upset, but we are also trying to bring a level of reality to the situation. And the reality is, Kyle will be here next year, and we will see what Kyle is made of when it comes to building a roster around Trey Lance. That is something that he hasn't had a guy like that since RG3, and that wasn't even a guy he wanted. So let's see what it looks like with the guy that he wants. Again, I can understand and I can sympathize with the frustration of starting Jimmy and the season going the way it is with Trey Lance on the sideline, because I am one who would firmly say I was in the boat that I really believe Trey Lance should have started week one. You just move on from the Jimmy G experiment and you start fresh this year. But we also understand, based on conversations that not only coaching staff and players have told us, but private conversations that we've had with players about their expectations of this year. They expected to go to the Super Bowl this year. They expected that to occur, and they expected that to occur with Jimmy Garoppolo specifically. And this is leaders in that locker room. So we can heap blame on anyone that we want, but at the end of the day, starting in OTAs, this team believed they were a Super Bowl team with Jimmy Garoppolo as the starter. That's the simple fact. So it is what it is. Again, I still would have liked to see Trey Lance come in and just have, you know, not even the Justin Fields treatment. Just give, like, I'm typically against giving young guys jobs. I like people to earn their roles within a football microcosm. But in that instance, I honestly was just ready. But I understand their view, their perspective. They're not me. I'm not in that locker room. I'm not in the day to day, in the weeds, in the mud with Jimmy Garoppolo and with all these guys. So their perceptions and perspectives are much different than ours as fans. So we might not like the outcome. We might not like where we're currently at right now. However, it doesn't change the fact that Kyle Shanahan is here to stay, and we will see 1 year more of Kyle Shanahan. And hopefully the tide turns with Trey Lance. I still have hope. Again, I'm not necessarily against Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't have anything against Jimmy and you talked about it earlier. Just kind of is who he is at this point. I am of the mindset I would still like to see Trey Lance, and I would still like to see his development start to occur this year rather than starting fresh next year. But we got time. We have time. We're just hitting the halfway point, and we'll find out. And we'll find out what's going to occur. And it all starts this Monday against the Rams. And we'll see. Again, one loss against the Rams is one step closer to seeing Trey Lance. So either way, that they win, they're kind of pushing towards the playoffs, or they lose and they're pushing towards Trey Lance. It all depends on how you look at it. And if you see Trey Lance as playing and that being a win, okay, then you might as well want the team to lose, because that's what's going to get Trey Lance in the game, is them losing. But on the flip side, if they're winning games, they're taking steps towards the play. It's so you can find positive and negatives in all of it. It's just how you want to look at it and how you want to go about our business. I think Jordan and I are pretty clear on where we stand. And that's likely going to be our stance throughout. Obviously, things will change. New information comes in, and we will not ignore new information. We bring in information, and that's how we form our opinions, and that's how we'll take it. JT says, what GM would be best for Kyle Shanahan next year? I guess this is kind of a two-parter. Do you think Kyle Shanahan relinquishes any of his personal control? And if so, do they opt to bring in a general manager who's been there, done that before, to work in tandem? Do you see that being an outcome?
No, and so this is what my understanding of, how this went, and this is me speculating, but this is how I imagine it went down. Kyle Shanahan, when he was hired, was the most sought after head coaching candidate in that cycle. He was the guy that every team with a vacancy wanted. He came to the 49ers, and I imagine he said something along the lines of, look, you guys ran Jim Harbaugh out of town. You wasted away at what I think was the best roster in the league from 2011 to 2013. You clearly don't know how to run, a football team and build a football team. So if I take this job, I want security. He got the 6-year contract, and I want final say, because I think, again, it all comes back to leverage. This is any negotiation. The person with the leverage is going to come out on top in any kind of dealing like that. So while I think maybe that, it's easy now to say that was a mistake, it's very hard to get somebody to relinquish that kind of power when that entire contingency of the deal you made with them to bring them into the position they're in was based on that. Do I think Kyle Shanahan's been great as a personnel, guy? No, not at all. He's missed a ton, and he's had guys that were his guys that didn't pan out. He shouldn't just get a pass for that. But you can't just bring in some other GM to start. But that's exactly the whole reason Jim Harbaugh isn't on the 49ers anymore, was because he and the front office couldn't get along. And as bad as things have been, and even maybe they aren't getting along, but they're at least doing so behind closed doors right now. So I think maybe, it's something it can't really be forced. You either have to get rid of him entirely, or he finds a way internally to, start listening to scouts maybe, and start maybe, delegating some of that power. But again, that's not going to happen until we see a couple years of Trey Lance, at least 1 year of Trey Lance. They're not just going to dump him. So that's the kind of conundrum the 49ers are in now, because you can't just bring in a general manager to just start bossing Kyle Shanahan around 6 years into his, role running this team. And again, it comes back to, he doesn't get just a pass for the mistakes he's made, but he also, I think people tend to forget that they also did a pretty good job building up a roster that, fell short of expectations winning the Super Bowl, obviously, but they took a team that was the worst in the league and they built them into a contender in 3 years. Their mistake was not properly addressing the quarterback position, which hopefully they did with Trey Lance. It was a little bit late, but it looks like they finally realized their mistake, and they made a, significant investment into a young, talented quarterback that's a dual threat. So I just think that there isn't a magic, answer to any of this. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter who the general manager is. If the 49ers are intent on maintaining this philosophy of having cap flexibility and having deals with outs built into them and moving money around the way they have, it doesn't matter who the GM is, because it's just differing philosophies. We've seen the Rams clearly this year. They don't care about kicking money down the line. They don't care about moving stuff around. They're going all in now. They don't care about the repercussions in the future. We saw the Saints do the same things for a number of years. And ultimately, it's a lot easier to do that when you have a quarterback that you believe in. And one thing I will add, if you look at all the contracts they've restructured over the last couple of years, the one that they haven't touched is the biggest one of them all, and Jimmy Garoppolo's, because they wanted the flexibility to get rid of him. So should they hit on Trey Lance, maybe they feel more comfortable moving that money around the way we've seen teams like the Saints do, the Chiefs have done with Mahomes and his deal. We're seeing the Rams are probably going to do the same with the Stafford extension. So there isn't just some easy fix of bringing in a new GM. It would have to be a complete change in organizational philosophy. And while I think Kyle Shanahan is the final say with football matters, he also isn't the one writing the checks. And until that decision-making kind of changes at the top, it doesn't matter who is turning in draft cards or signing free agents, if that makes sense. The philosophy needs to change at the very top. And I see no reason why that would, given this is how they've done things for the better part of 2 decades.
And a big reason for that is Parag Marathe, who's at the top right next to Jed York, who manages the money side of things. So again, we can change and flush out as many player personnel people as we want. At the end of the day, the philosophies still remain. We've seen it kind of get relaxed in some instances. Again, Trent Williams, that was huge. Parag had to go all out and give Trent exactly what he wanted from a contract standpoint to get him here. We haven't seen that a lot in the past. That again was because of Kyle. Kyle said it needed to get done, so they got it done. So on one token, you can look at Kyle and him, and we can see Trent Williams playing at the level he's playing at? Well, does Kyle get any responsibility for bringing him back and keeping that player on this roster, ensuring he didn't go to the Chiefs? Who knows how different the Chiefs year could be looking this year with a stalwart on the left side and Trent Williams protecting Patrick Mahomes a little bit better. Their season could have looked completely different with just that key addition alone. So again, there's multiple things. It hasn't been a perfect year at the end of the day. There's a lot of people that are upset. We hear why you're upset, and we get it. We understand. But again, if you're bringing, first of all, it starts with Kyle. And I think to your point, ownership, they have to be coming together and agree to delegate responsibilities. That has to be something that they both agree to, because if you recall, it's written in legal binding contracts. Like this thing of like, oh, we'll just have someone else make the call. Like I guarantee you there's legally binding language in contracts that specify all of the power and delegation of power and all of that. So the thought that it's just like, oh, we're just going to bring in a new GM or Kyle's just going to delegate this to someone else, it has to be an all hands on deck type of situation for that to actually occur. And with Kyle being the main piece at the top that separates himself from football ops and Parag and Jed, I don't necessarily see that happening, because let's say you do bring a GM in that does have nothing to do with Kyle Shanahan and you delegate power to him, sooner or later that GM could be enough of an authority to be the guy to remove Kyle Shanahan. So let's keep it real. Kyle Shanahan probably doesn't want that, and he's probably not going to do that. So it's ride or die with Kyle at this point. I understand people want things changed. They want to see things that are different, and they want to see this like philosophical change happen immediately. I just don't know if it's going to happen, and if it were to happen, it's going to take a lot of moving parts for that to occur. It just right now it is what it is, and again, what we keep saying is yes, you can be upset, you can want things to change, you can shout all the fire Kyle Shanahan you want. I don't care. You can go on every tweet from here on that you have to the rest of the year could be fire Kyle Shanahan. Go for it. Like, no one's stopping you. But just know that he's not getting fired. He will be here next year. And so just to the point that we've been trying to make, and we'll put a bow on it because we've been probably spending a little too much time on it, is that both Jordan and I believe that things have not been going the way they should have been going, but we also recognize there is time to correct and get back on track, whether it's this year or next year. We just know that there's a lot to come in the future. So it is what it is, and we'll be along for the ride. We'll be along for the ride.
One other thing I would add too. So let's say the people that want Kyle Shanahan gone, John Lynch gone, like they get their way, right? Like they cut ties. He's gone after the season. Who is a viable head coaching candidate that's out there that's going to be a clear upgrade, that's going to look at this team that everyone swears Kyle and John Lynch ran into the ground and is terrible? Who is going to want to take a job with somebody else's handpicked quarterback with this roster that people make out to be so terrible, doesn't have first-round picks for the next 2 years? Like, I don't think – like, I understand the frustration, but you have to be realistic in this. What head coach worth their, that's an actual valuable asset is going to look at the situation and go, you know what, this is tenable. I don't have a first-round pick. I didn't handpick Trey Lance, but this team is heavily invested in him. The cap situation isn't great. Like, if the situation is as bad as people are making it out to be, why is anyone who's worth it going to want to take this job? And if it's somebody who isn't worth it, why are you going to take a step back just because you're so fed up with Kyle Shanahan that you're like willing to take a lesser coach in his place? Like, that's the thing that makes no sense to me. Like, once they made that trade up for Trey Lance, they invested so much capital. It's Kyle's job for the foreseeable future. Like, how do we know that enough? Like, people always say like Brian Dable or Eric Bieniemy or these guys or Joe Brady. How do we know that Joe Brady wants to coach Trey Lance and he wants to, to keep him going? See, this is my thing, is that everybody that offers, this criticism of firing Kyle, I haven't heard one name out there that is a clear objective upgrade over.
There's no solution. The solution is firing Kyle. That's not a solution. That's a reaction. That's a reaction to a cause. That is not a solution. firing Kyle is one leg. What's the other 12 legs that follow? No one has an answer because there is no answer. Because just like Jordan is alluding to, who the hell is coming into this franchise to come save them? Again, Parag and Jed aren't going anywhere. So that those philosophies still stay the same.
Yeah, and that's
who's
what
it gonna be?
that's what it comes down to. Is it's ultimately like if it's as bad as the people who want Kyle Shanahan to go, who would want to come and take that job? I don't know about you guys. I'm not an NFL head coach, clearly, but any profession I'm in, I'm not going to come in and clean up somebody else's mess. I would like to go somewhere where I have a clean start, and the production that comes from my work is based on what I do. And your tenure isn't like, let's say a coach comes in, they do take over for Kyle. Their entire head coaching tenure is going to be contingent on the player that Kyle Shanahan handpicked the year before. And you don't have first round picks for the next 2 years to
What do you do?
On top of the fact that Kyle Shanahan has been building this team in his image for the last 5 seasons with Adam Peters and John Lynch. Like, there's just so much of this. I understand it. Like, you're fed up with Kyle. I get it. But there's not a realistic solution in the short term that nets a positive where you have a coach. Like, it would essentially, like, people think that if you just fire Kyle and get a new head coach, if they did that, you would literally be tearing this thing down from the studs, and you wouldn't get a first-round pick until 2023. Sorry, 2024. So, like, it makes no sense, like, to just completely abandon the team that's been built in one man's image for the last certain amount of years. It would have been 5 years, will be 6 years next year, to just bring in somebody just for the sake of changing. Like, that just doesn't make sense. And it's like, it's not going to happen. But even if we entertain the hypothetical, like, it makes absolutely no sense. I don't understand how this is like it gets the traction that it does. Like, I get people are frustrated, but it just doesn't make sense to me that, like, people can't see that this is a team that has all these players locked up under contract that Kyle Shanahan has for his team, that they have for the defense DeMeco Ryans wants to run, that they have for the offense that they want to call. Joe Brady doesn't run the same offense as Kyle Shanahan. Brian Dable doesn't run the same offense as Kyle Shanahan. This entire team is built around running the football. Do you watch Buffalo Bills games? They don't run the football, like, ever. There's so much more to this than just replacing the guy with the headset and the clipboard on the sideline. And I think that gets lost in translation sometimes.
It does, and we understand. We understand that we're talking to a lot of people who view football through an emotional lens, and that's basically how they view football. So their responses and kind of thought process match. They go through the emotional lens, and that's okay. That's what being a fan is. It's short for fanatic. We're all very emotionally tied to this team. We want to see them be successful, and when they're not, it hurts, and we want to know why, and we want to get into it, and we want to rip it apart, and we want to assign blame, and we understand that's how it works amongst fans. But I guess that's probably why we are in the business of content creating and not just being your typical fan. So it is what it is. I think we made our points clear. We understand there are people that are upset, and they aren't going to change. They believe that is the solution. They're going to ride that to their grave until they actually see the turnaround. So it's fine. That's not our battle to wage at this point. All we are simply stating is our opinions on the matter. Take it or leave it for however you like. Jordan, it's been fun. It's always fun. I appreciate you hopping on here, man. Tell the good people here where to find you, follow you, and get more of your content.
My Twitter @'s on the screen here. You can find me on Niners Nation too. And I do appreciate, even if I don't agree with, like, the points being made, like, I appreciate the people in the comments that are, fired up. Like, hey, I get it. Like, I'm only 26, so the Niners haven't been great for most of my life, but I grew up going to games. My dad had season tickets at Candlestick for like 30 years. I grew up watching Tim Rattay and Ken Dorsey, and I thought Sean Hill was the savior. Like, I get it. Like, it's frustrating to watch this team lose, and I can appreciate the passion behind not wanting to see it. I'm just saying that there is still a long-term window of optimism due to the fact that we don't know what's going to happen with Trey Lance yet. And hey, he could end up not being a great NFL quarterback. I hate to say that's in the range of outcomes, but there also is the possibility that he ends up being really good. And there's enough positive that I've seen from watching hours and hours of his college tape and watching what we've seen at the NFL level to believe there still is some hope going forward. And for the first time, really, since Colin Kaepernick's probably the only time that I've been alive outside of maybe Jeff Garcia, but Jeff Garcia was never going to be a long-term answer, where the 49ers felt like they had a true franchise guy that could lead the team to prominence for a decade or so. So I understand the frustration, and I appreciate where everybody's coming from in the comments saying that, they're sick of this. They just want to win. I agree with you. I get no joy watching the 49ers lose games. It brings me absolutely zero pleasure to do so. But I also think that until we see what happens with Trey Lance, I'm not ready to give up hope yet. But regardless, I do appreciate the passion and the intensity that you guys have, even if we disagree. So I just want you to know that that is respected on my end, and I can empathize where you're coming from. So yeah, like I said, Niners Nation, Twitter and stuff, and I'm always happy if you guys ever, or if you're on Twitter at all. I do try to engage with as many people as I can. If you guys want to just talk football, I love doing it. As you guys can see, I love sitting here rambling, talking about it. So hopefully they find a way to win some games this year. But if they don't, ultimately, like I said, 2022 is really what's going to define this regime. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's really all I can say at this point, because I understand people are fed up. They've been losing a lot lately, and it's become the norm for most of my life, and it sucks. I get it, but I'm still willing to have like an inkling of hope that Trey Lance is the savior that brings us out of this, rut that we've been in.
And 100%. At the end of the day, we're all fans. That's why we're like Jordan and I. We're 49er fans. That's where we've come from, and we've decided that we want to talk about this team on a different level. And just like you guys are fans, there's been pretty much about 100 people in this room for about an hour and 45 minutes amidst one of the worst seasons we've had in recent memory. And there's been a lot of bad seasons. Again, we're 49er fans. I'm 32. So I was born in 89. The last time the 49ers won the Super Bowl was in 94. I was barely old enough to even remember it. All I know as a Niner fan is pain and suffering, other than, the short little window of hope that we had with Harbaugh that was then met immediately with immense pain and suffering. So we're all in the same boat. We've all been here. We're all fans of the team. We all want the team to be successful. But at the end of the day, man, it is what it is. We can look at it as an insult and we could take it personally, or we could just look at it as this is the game of football. This is why they play the game. You don't know what you are until you get on those fields on Sundays and you actually go out and execute. So it is what it is. I get it. We're not happy. We're not pleased. And to echo what Jordan is saying, we do respect the passion. We respect the passion. And that's how you should be as a fan. You should be passionate. You should be watching lives amidst a losing season to just vent your emotions and vent your feelings about the team that you've invested so much into, so much of your money, so much of your time and effort. So we understand. Obviously, we just like to give another side of it, another perspective and another viewpoint. You guys are more than welcome to feel exactly how you feel. And I don't want you guys to think that we're trying to dictate to you how you should feel. We're just giving our 2 cents at the end of the day. So as always, again, we're losing. We're not winning right now, but you guys are still supporting, which means a lot to us as content creators. Jordan and I, you're reading Jordan on Niners Nation. You're watching our lives here. It means a lot. At the end of the day, we might not agree on certain things, but it means a lot to us, and we really do appreciate it. So hopefully next Friday, Jordan, when we have our next vibe check episode, the hope is that the vibe is a little bit better, right? That's the whole point. We're hoping that we show up next week with a little bit better vibe. Again, winning cures everything. A win on Monday Night Football would do wonders, right? But no one's holding their breath either, and that's fair. No one should hold their breath, because you just don't do that. We want you to stay. We want you to be around. Come back to the next live on Friday. Don't hold your breath. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what goes down, and we'll be right back here next week to talk about good, bad, and different. We'll be here to give our takes, and that's how it is. So in the meantime, again, appreciate everyone for stopping in, and we do appreciate your feedback, regardless if we might see eye to eye or not. We love the feedback, and we want you guys. That's how the show works. We work off engagement, and so we want to hear your thoughts, and we do appreciate everyone who's chimed in and done it all. So thank you guys. And like I said, find Jordan at /cousin on Twitter. Find him at ninersnation.com. I'm biased, but he's definitely one of their best writers on a site that carries a lot of really good writers. So check him out there. And like I said, we'll be back. And if the season doesn't go well, we're headed towards the draft. Jordan, like Jordan said earlier, will be in Mobile, potentially Shrine game, all kinds of stuff. So it is what it is. Thank you guys as always for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Hopefully we're talking about a win next week, but we'll do it again as always. Appreciate you